Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Cryptid Creator Corner. I'm Byron O'Neill, and today we are joined again by the incredible Ram V. From sweeping original sci-fi to dark-gripping supernatural occult espionage, Ram is consistently pushing the boundaries of the comics medium in new and inventive ways. Today, we are diving into his massive new sci-fi graphic novel series, Deicidium, launching from French publisher Morgan and coming to English language readers via Image Comics. Plus, we're talking about his brand new DC Vertigo series, Black Tower, The Raven Conspiracy. Ram, welcome back. Always a pleasure to have you on the show.
Always a pleasure to be here and talk to you. Thanks
Well, I
for thanks
appreciate
for
it.
having me.
Of course. Well, we've got plenty to talk about, but first, I want to touch on your break. I've been working with artists or, been one myself for over 3 decades now, and not enough attention is paid to how beneficial it can be to step away and to recharge and what that can do to spark creative expression. So, what was the catalyst for you wanting, maybe needing to just take a little break?
Yeah, I think, part of his complacency, uh, you know, I've touched on this before in things like blue and green and rare flavors. It's very easy to go like, oh, I'm comfortable now. And things like, I pitch things, they get picked up and it's easy to make comics in a way that it wasn't when I was starting out, right? And
Sure.
it's easy to sort of sit in that comfortable space and then, slowly that complacency creeps into the creative side of things, which is not great. And so like any good artist, I said, no, no, this place of comfort and good feels is good for me, but not great for the art. So I must um step away and consider what kind of stuff I want to do going forward. I think the things I pursued closer to the beginning of that break, something like One Hand, Six Fingers, is a lot closer to the kind of stuff that I'm interested in doing going forward. Not just pushing narrative, but also pushing form and structure and whatnot. And even Decidium in that sense is a first for me to work in 72-page 96-page installations plus work with 3 graphic novels over, you know, 3 years each, therefore 9 graphic novels in total.
Yeah.
Is an expansive story, that a structure that I haven't worked with before. So, yeah, that break was basically me going, "I feel too comfortable, and what am I doing? I should be doing more interesting things."
Did you find that the break allowed you to pull inspiration from other things that you're just not used to because you kind of get sort of with the blinders on and, we kind of get in the comics is a grind. So, you just and I
No,
lament that all the time.
especially, like, monthly superhero stuff has a
Right.
cadence and a tone to it. And look, I think it's pretty evident from my work that I've never been one to sort of set into that comfortable tone and take the sort of, "Hey, this is another story that you've probably read some version of 10 times before," you know? So I'm not saying, like, I was someone who was falling into that, but it's a completely different muscle than writing something like Blue and Green or writing something like, Layla Starr. And, like in any sort of profession, if you don't work a certain muscle, it will eventually atrophy. And creatively, I was feeling very sad at not being able to use that other muscle as much. And so I was like, listen, I've been flexing this muscle for about little over 2 years now. I need to go flex some other muscles. So that was the reason for the break. Um, in terms of inspiration, I've always been someone who watches widely, reads widely. So I don't think that ever stopped. Yeah, yeah. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I was wondering if Decidium was a response kind of even to the break, not with narrative or visual content timescale, but, it gives you more time as a creator to
Really?
to to actually do your work, and that's
Yeah.
one thing that comics is not very good at doing.
No, I was actually discussing this with Evan yesterday, Evan Cagle, who's the artist on Deicidium. And
Yeah.
we were talking about how he's able to interpret characters in a different way than what I've put in the script. And so sometimes he'll respond to what's there in the script, but he'll take an approach that I hadn't seen. So if it's a somber moment, for example, sometimes he'll just take the character and go like, "Nah, I'm gonna make it a wildly funny moment." And when that happens, it changes the character in ways that I didn't intend for it to do in that place. And instead
Okay.
of going, "Oh no, you've changed it, go back and fix it," when you have time as a writer, you can go, "Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know this character had that in them. Now let me write them since they have demonstrated this ability. Let me write them in a way that makes sense for this kind of character." And so
Gotcha.
it becomes truly collaborative, which isn't something you can do. I mean, very much, people talk about the conveyor belt of, writer script goes to an artist, then an artist does that. And that's one way of doing it, but that's not the only way. And I want to tell people like there's another way that is so much more interesting and more joyful when you're actually collaborating, but it takes time and it
Yeah.
needs room. And I need to be able to go, you know what, today I'm just thinking, I'm not writing. So yeah.
Okay. Well, to give people the perspective of what Deicidium is all about, this is a story about a corporate consortium that is controlling the world through religion. As old gods begin to resurface through ordinary people, which sparks a control versus freedom sort of conflict. We got that teaser for Free Comic Book Day this year.
Yeah.
That was Omens, which blew my mind. Let me start with the title, right? Deicidium is Latin for the killing of the gods. And thematically, this idea is foundational to our progressive question mark March as
Yeah.
human beings, with our shared cultural stories. We have eschatological, like Ragnarok, the murder of Osiris, Mayan pantheon, Greek gods, often
Yeah.
uses these elements for like world foundation, succession, seasonality, end of times, reboot, right? So this feels like a collective expression of all of that of
But
a sort.
also, I
So
think in that little piece you just said, you missed the sort of persistent myth of the human rising to godhood through the murder of gods, Hercules, for example, or
yeah,
even with Hindu mythology, Ram, who was meant to be a mortal human who rose to godhood by challenging the gods themselves. And so I feel like there is a really wonderful aspect of being able to claim your own destiny only after you have defeated the things that are supposed to govern it. Um, and I feel like it speaks to the time that we live in now, without putting too much of a sort of straight line between the two things. Like, I feel we are governed by our narratives. I feel like stories don't exist anymore. Franchises
yeah,
do, and IPs do, and IPs must have their following. And you can't say one thing about someone's favorite character because that would be wrong. Gods weren't always like that for us. Our OG gods were things that we, you know, hunted with, rose with, things that governed our everyday life. And I feel like somewhere in the human sort of transition from that kind of personal deification of things you encountered in everyday life to this
yeah.
kind of organized, we all worship the big white dude in the sky. Um, somewhere in there is a loss of both personal responsibility and personal empowerment in some ways. So these are things that my brain is contending with when I write Day City.
Okay. Yeah. When I was reading through Omens, I guess one of the things that I took about it was generative AI, right? Our stories, our mythologies that are passed down in mosques, churches, campfires, sacrifices, right?
Yeah,
This is what makes us human. And now they're fed into a machine to be spat out of this as this like sort of collective dissonance in
yeah,
my mind, devoid of meaning and, monetized for the ultimate benefit of corporations, bent on absolute control of, well, everything that we do.
yeah, yeah.
So,
As has been the goal from the very beginning, even before these were corporations, the goal of every sort of semi-organized religious movement has been one of control, even
right.
if it starts off from a very uh, um, well-intentioned place. And so I think for me, the fundamental difference is in the way human beings come up with gods versus the way human beings are controlled by gods. And so in that way, the story kind of writes it. So the conflict kind of writes itself, if you will.
Sure. And you have 12 in here that are resurfacing. It's a big number of that in terms of numerology. You've got
No, no, I don't have 12 that are resurfacing.
Oh, I'm
Right
sorry.
here
Okay, I thought there were
in the first volume, you'll come across three that we see resurfacing and hints of
Okay.
more that may be around. There's
Okay.
also gods who may or may not have been around since the very beginning of things, who have been in hiding, who now feel emboldened to step forth for one reason or the other.
Okay.
And the 12 you talk about are 12 mortal humans who've been trained, if you will, by the powers that be, that in case this gets out of hand and the gods ever come back, we will, this time, instead of waiting for a Hercules to show up, we will have 12 that are trained and equipped and ready to perform the Deicidium that we are all here to read.
Okay. So and again, don't want to get into spoilers or anything like that, but you were kind of alluding to there may be gods that appear, and that gives me a Neil Gaiman kind of feel to it, like American gods, where we have deities that are more of a
Sure.
modern expression. So
Sure, some of them absolutely are. There are a few in this that have been around since the sort of birth of humanity, if you will, that have learned to hide in this time where they are no longer worshipped as they once were. And so that is very much Cayman's American gods-ish. But
right.
I think the fascinating aspect for me where this deviates from things like that is that I don't think I've ever read a story where the sort of godhood manifests within everyday people, which I think is a much more interesting take on the whole gods returning idea. Is because every time I've seen it done, I believe Hickman also had a book about gods returning at some point, where he had gods kind of floating in from space or wherever they were beyond us. I like the idea that the guy who, your Uber driver who you were nasty to yesterday, today is like, I am a god now.
Okay.
And I'm being facetious, but you understand the implications of when someone who is meant to be someone who is meant to be a person in the stratification of society from the lower rung suddenly goes, actually, hold on a second, I am God, and you no longer have power over me. That upsets society in ways that is very interesting, especially in a future where people subscribe to the idea of being governed by a being that is superior to them. How do you reconcile that with the fact that the guy next to you has blue skin and is flying now, and
Yeah.
so yeah, I really I don't even know the answer. I'm gonna discover it as I write 9 volumes. So um yeah, and in the end, it's also a comic book that's meant to be fun. It's me playing out all of my shonen manga
Yeah. Yeah.
fandom
Yeah.
as well. So there's gonna be battles between gods or between gods and god killers. And I think a lot of people tend to forget gods aren't exclusive to human beings. There may have been gods long before there was humanity on Earth. So
Yeah, I'm definitely getting a bit of sort of an Akira vibe here, with the echoes of the, like, raw natural power that's given to an ordinary human up against that rigid, institutionalized establishment sort of
yeah,
thing.
yeah,
You know?
yeah.
Yeah.
There's definitely elements of that in there. Um, I also think that there's the thing that fascinates me about world mythology is just discovering characters and stories from across the world. And even
Yeah.
though this is Deicidium is set far, far in the future, and so the world as we know it may not be as recognizable, there's still there's still bits and pieces there that people can recognize and go, oh, this is from my culture, or this is from where I am. And I find that fascinating given the, coming back to the form discussion that we were having before. I find that fascinating that this book will be released in multiple territories at once. It will come out in different parts of the world at the same time or at similar times, and people will be reading. And I'm wondering how many people are going to look at it and go like, wait, I recognize this god, or maybe this god, this power comes from this. And so I also wanted to encourage a conversation about the same thing across cultures, across languages, which isn't something you get with the way comics are released now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and in ways, this very much feels like your most ambitious project ever.
I mean, I always say that, so I'm trying not to say that. I always say that about every project I do. So I leave that for other people to judge. But just in terms of the logistics of it and the scale of it, yeah, absolutely. This is huge, not only for me, but also for all of my collaborators. I mean, Evan will be working on close to 220 pages over the course of his time on the book. And then Anand will come in and do another 200 and something pages. And then our third surprise artist will come in, who I know who it is, but we haven't announced it yet, will come in and do another 220 pages. So it is going to be a long-term project. The publishers are showing remarkable faith in trusting the fact that I can deliver this. So it's gonna be, yeah, it's gonna be an interesting thing to see. I wonder where things will be after 3 or 4 volumes have released. Yeah,
That's really cool. It sounds enticing as a creator to be able to say, well, we've got sort of a blueprint,
yeah,
but we got the roadmap, but we have no idea exactly where this is going. So that's a
yeah.
lot of
No,
fun.
and that is my preferred way of writing, and again, something that you don't get to do with a monthly ongoing because God forbid you go to your editor and say, "Man, I have no idea where this goes after issue 3. I'll
Yeah.
figure it out." And then that makes people nervous because they're like, no, no, we have to share this with other creators and they have to figure out what happens with this character. We need to ask this team. None of that over here. I'm like, even with the first volume, I was like, I have a vague idea of what the shape is, but what note exactly do we end on is something we'll discover as I write it. And I suspect that will keep being true throughout the run.
Well, one of the things that I was taking from my Omens read was this sci-fi as being creating an interesting juxtaposition of like kind of looking at gods of the past, right? Because you've got tech. That's the
Yeah.
thing that we always equate with sci-fi. And the first thing that stood out to me was the kinesics. The
Mm.
characters move through space, and how this is sort of tied to material culture and how we in turn now are interacting with emergent technologies from a physical perspective.
Yeah.
I went immediately to Marty's hoverboard and Back to the Future Part
Yeah.
Two.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so how does that what was intriguing about that for you, presenting high-tech culture, so much of that, embracing sci-fi, and creating a better lens for kind of how we talk about our mythological histories of the past?
Well, my view of tech has grown more skeptical
Okay.
as I've spent more time here. Like, don't get me wrong, we've done. I have said to this day that humanity's saving grace will be the fact that we are capable of creating things, and that has always been, uh, um, to me, the most beautiful thing about us is you can give somebody a little chisel and a hammer, and then they will come up with something that will revolutionize all of society, as with the invention of the wheel, if you will. So while I maintain that level of optimism, I'm also increasingly aware that the more things change, the more things stay the same. In that, you know, all the effort we could be putting into, clean energy and maybe even flying cars and jetpacks and traveling around that way. Instead, that energy is being put into, facial recognition and drone warfare and um that is feels cool and techy, but like an AI that will create an image of a clown when you ask it to, like, who asked for that, you know?
Right.
And so and these things are taking up intellectual resources, natural resources. Um, you know, what a point for humanity to look back after 20, 30 years and go like, I could have been working on jetpacks. Instead, I spent a whole bunch of water and power and built a whole bunch of data centers so people on social media could lampoon each other with badly created AI videos. So, yeah, so my part of the way I'm approaching tech and Deicidium sort of comes from that place, in that
Okay.
it's such a technologically advanced society. And yet, this is a society that also had 5 world wars and somehow had to turn to God and organized religion to pull it from the mire of its own conflict. And that is not without its adaptation and adopting of technology. But now technology is a second tier, it is subservient to the needs of organized religion, if you will,
Okay.
because we did it. We let it go out of control once before it almost destroyed us. And now, therefore, the word of God shall define what technology we use and what we don't. And obviously, that too is used to create inequality. And so there are still poor people working, in a place where you have a hoverboard and a robot that scans people's faces as it flies by. You still have people working in shanty towns on mechanized equipment. And so, um, I find maybe my commentary on tech is that it will never solve the human condition. That is an answer that is non-technological. And no matter how much we think of ourselves as progressed because we have all this cool technology, effectively we're still flinging poop at each other on trees. So,
Yes. Well, that now that depression has fully set in, let's get
hey,
into
I
kind of
never
the
claimed to be a positive, sunshiny kind of writer.
it's not what I've come to expect, so,
No.
yeah, I should not be surprised. But the visual blueprint here, you kind of were talking about shonen manga being an influence, but it's also very French, right? I'm
Yeah.
seeing some, like, Marcinelle school with, like, exaggerated proportions and
Yeah.
dynamic postures and, environment as a character, and it's kind of hard to escape a Mita Lerland, kind of screaming metal coding as
Yep.
well in here.
Yep. Yep.
So,
Not to
we
mention
talk
that page 4 and 5, Gustave Doré nod as well. Yeah.
But, we constantly are talking about influences, but this seems like, and from hearing you talk about how you're wanting to pull in people essentially from all these cultures, sort of wanting to be seen, this sounds like a comprehensive way to also visually tell that story as well, incorporating
Yeah.
all these
Yeah.
different elements.
Yeah. I mean, look, people keep saying like write what you know, and I've heard some pushback against that idea as people going like, yeah, but that's very limiting. I'm like, no, no, that's meant to encourage you to know more things, not write less. And so this is a book that kind of falls in that zone of exceptional things that only this team of creators could know, right? Like Evan is originally from Texas, but lives in Paris, very clearly inspired by classical illustration, a lot of it French, but also inspired by Japanese animation and manga and storytelling from there. And so he brings those influences, but also he's telling a story that, to my mind, is set in a very India-esque place, which is an influence I don't think we've seen. I don't think we've seen Franco-Belgian illustration art mashed up with manga set in an Indian setting with characters and gods from mythologies that are entirely foreign to those places as well. And
Yeah.
so but in 2026, a bunch of well-traveled people can tell the story, and I find it interesting that that we can and we will attempt to and carry all of these influences on our sleeves, and yet sort of put them together in a way that is new and interesting.
So in terms of a kind of collective collaborative language, did you have to make Dawn Runner to maybe have, okay, confidence may not be the right word, trust maybe not exactly either, but like a synchronicity, right? So let's commit to 9
Mm.
volumes as a creative team together. No problem. We can do this.
Yeah, look, I mean, Evan and I are an interesting duo. Evan's first graphic novel work of any length was with me, and that was Dawn Runner.
Yeah.
And he'll admit it, and I'll say this: I think Evan's work was always special, and it was always brilliant. But you still need to learn like the most nuts and bolts banal stuff, which is impossible to pick up no matter how much of a genius you are until you've had to sit down and draw, 12 pages in a month or something. And the
Yeah.
moment you have to do that, you pick up so many new constraints, but also so many new ways of solving those constraints, right? And so I think confidence is maybe the right word to use in that when we arrived at Deicidium, when we started to take it up, like, I'll be honest, the starting was a bit rough in terms of like, oh, I don't, Evan, this world has existed in my head from 2015 or before that, but it hasn't existed in Evan's head for that long. And so when I start, I don't like to do preamble. I don't like to do give sort of ease people in. I will drop you right into the middle of things and go like, you'll pick it up. That's great for the reader, but it's really hard for the artist because they're like, I have no context for this world. Like,
Right.
are they supposed to be wearing this material or this material? Am I allowed to use holographic screens? Am I allowed to use teleportation? What's going on? And so the starting of it was a lot of it was spent finding out things like that. But I think because now you're comfortable with the sort of nuts and bolts of it, it's great to be spending time on the more interesting intellectual aspects of like, what is this world? Rather than going, oh, can I draw 5 panels on this page or can I draw 6 panels on this page? And so I
Sure.
think that level of confidence really elevates the work because you're no longer concerning yourself too much with things like how do I translate action on a page? This is a question that Evans answered now that he's worked on 300 plus pages of comics between New Gods and Dawn Runner. So I think in that way, it makes the collaboration much more interesting. Synchronicity is an obvious sort of side effect of collaborating with someone for years. I wouldn't be
Right.
working with Evan if I didn't absolutely enjoy every minute of working with him, considering we've done what 2.5 plus big books together now. So the synchronicity is a given. Thank God, because otherwise, if I was writing scripts the way I was writing for him the first time we collaborated, I would absolutely be broken. Now my scripts are much shorter because I'm like, Evan, you know what I mean when I say these 2 words. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, on that confidence front, for you, we've talked a lot about Evan here, but did you have to write Batman first to feel like, hey, I'm established enough that I can take a swing this big?
I mean, yes. To be honest, it with me, you might consider this a matter of ego or a matter of my head being too large for the rest of me. But when I started off in comics, one of the first books I did was a book at Image called Paradiso. And it was similarly large in scope. It was a living city, and people from varying parts of a post-apocalyptic world were arriving in this little living city. And there was going to be a long, like if that series had gone on, it would have been, 30, 40, 50 issues, multiple years, multiple story arcs. And I went in naively going like, of course it'll be great. It'll all be fine. And I went to Eric Stevenson, pitched it. He was like, great. I love the ambition. Let's see where it goes. First year did really well. By the time second arc came around, the readership had fallen off. I mean, obviously it was creators nobody knew. Today, Dave Malya Pramanik is doing Moon Knight, and I've done Batman and Swamp Thing and whatnot. But at that point in time, we were just 2 new creators. And so the idea to do something ambitious like this has always existed. So I won't say that it comes up as a matter of confidence. But I worry less about will I be able to see it through now. And so all of my attention and all of my anxiety is about will it be cool enough, not will I be able to finish it, which I think is a different, nicer anxiety to have.
Yeah. With those, I guess, sort of anxieties as a creator, I was curious about something that you said recently on Twitter X Q&A, that you're sort of fascinated by the emotional sincerity, I think, and lack of cynicism in a lot of, Japanese genre
Yeah,
storytelling, which and you're definitely delving into that with this. So I'm trying to get sort of a tone for how Deicidium is going to play itself out. So do you attribute that to like a Japanese cultural manifestation, like their worldview? Because it is very, very different than I feel like the way our superhero narratives are going now. You see, and they're fantastic books, right?
yeah,
Absolute Green Arrow is wonderful,
yeah,
but we're definitely playing off of corporate cynicism in a way that
yeah.
feels different, I guess, than here. Is that, I guess, are you trying to do
No,
that?
no, absolutely. I think these things are absolutely cultural manifestations.
Okay.
Um, the idea that American fiction lives in a post-ironic, sort of cynical place is not new. It's been broached before by other creators, but I think so hard to push away from that because it's part of the cultural narrative of things. Like even sincerity, when you find it in books occasionally, I've seen people read that and go and dismiss that as like therapy writing. This is just a writer trying to be good and nice because their therapist said this is how you have to talk. And so I
Okay.
feel like it's almost impossible to get away from it because culturally it's impossible to get away from. Whereas I think with Japanese society, given the history of that country and what it was pre and post World War,
Yeah.
um, I think there's such a shock to the system in terms of who you believed you were before the war and the reality of, you know, how much reconstruction and putting yourself back together you had to do after the war, that I think some level of appreciation of how beautiful it is to just, you know, be human and have human feelings and emotions and be able to express them. Also, especially in a society where stoicism has historically been valued and championed, right? Um, so for a notoriously stoic society to then be in love with even the most barest sincere display of emotion makes complete sense. Um, so yeah, I'm interested in pulling at that because I'm so fascinated by it. But obviously, it is still foreign to me, and I almost have to teach myself to like, no, it's okay for characters to express themselves. They don't have to be stoic all the time. They don't have to be heroic all the time. They don't have to be sad or melancholy. They don't have to be any of these things. They can be silly. We can do silly things without the need to explain ourselves. And so yeah, I'm having to like give myself permission to do things that I haven't done before. Yeah.
Okay. What do you feel like there's been a benefit for you as a creator living and working out from under the umbrella, I guess, of America for a while now? I think you went to school here, way back when or
I
something.
did my master's in material science and chemical engineering
Yeah.
at Penn. I went to school in India, and then I've been working in comics largely in the UK. Um, I don't know that I was ever someone who, I mean, I clearly worked under the umbrella of American publishing, but I didn't start in American publishing quite in that way.
Yeah.
A lot of creators I know were quote unquote in the system before they did their first work. And what I mean by that is I know people will be like, "Oh yeah, I've been coming to San Diego Comic Con since I was 10. I wrote my first comic when I was, 21. So you were there for a large part of more than a decade before you wrote your comic." I quit chemical engineering in 2013. I wrote my first semi-professional short story around that year. And I wrote my first comic in 2016. So I had zero understanding or exposure to the umbrella of American comics publishing quite literally
Okay.
before I arrived there. I said this in a New Gods interview where they were like, what did it feel like taking on, work done by one of the industry's sort of greatest names in Jack Kirby? And I was like, well, on some level, I felt like the fool who walked into the church and went like, who is Jesus Christ? So, it felt a little bit like that in comics, and I've always sort of felt a little bit like that um, going into the sort of mainstream American comics publishing. And I think,
Yeah.
honestly, that's a good thing. You shouldn't have all your creators already being fans of the properties that they're working on. Sometimes it's great to have a creator who comes in and goes, why can't we do things this other way? And it's almost impossible for even me to think of things that I'm a fan of in quite that way, because the very contention that you're a fan means there is already a version of the thing that you like the most. And
Right.
so how can you ever create a version of that thing that you like the most that is better or more interesting than the version you already idolize? So um yeah. So I've always been a bit of an outsider, and I take pleasure in continuing to be one to this day.
I did too. Well, I want to move on, and so I can carve some time for Black Tower.
Yeah.
This is the return of the Swamp Thing team up with the Mikes, Spicer, and Perkins. They are back. In this one, you've got a
We
young.
refer to them internally as spicy and perky
Okay, I will.
because they're both mics. We refer to them as spicy and perky.
I will have to make a note of that. That is hilarious. Well, to kind of give people a perspective of this, you've got a young rookie agent, Darren Burrows, who is sent from America to train in England with Division 9, which is an esoteric branch of the British intelligence that handles the paranormal, called in espionage circles, the Black Tower. So I'm sort of getting Slow Horses meets Hellboy. Am I far off?
No, no. My original pitch was Slow Horses meets Harry Potter. So there you go.
Okay. Okay.
Um, Although Hellboy is probably a closer pick given my natural inclinations towards the darker side of things. So, um, yeah, very much that vibe. Although I will say the magic is tempered, and the joy of it for me is more in the spy stuff than the magic stuff, because I feel like somebody else said this to me and put it really succinctly. I said, I like magic when it's secretive and in the corners that you don't expect. I don't like it when people are throwing fireballs at each other on the street. And this friend I was talking to turned around and said, yeah, because it's occult. It's supposed to be occult knowledge. So not everyone has it, and it's not widely known. And that put this idea in my head that when magic becomes known, it loses its power. And so it makes complete sense that the last place that it survives is intelligence circles where secrecy and discretion thrive. So, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I saw you were reading The Psychic Battlefield by Adam and Mandelbaum. I was not familiar with this one. I assume that was sort of research for
It
this,
was
but
research, and I read a few other things. I think there's a German manual of demonic magic that I read, and I read another
okay.
book called Crowley's London. So yeah, there have been a few things. Did some research on John Dee and the historic use of metaphysics and magic in British intelligence and warfare. So yeah.
So to play around with this, I'm trying to get a feeling for it. Are we looking for a more like, okay, you talked about what you just read, old German history on this magic treatise or whatever, a little more, I'm not going to say factual, but like less Art Bell, I guess. How much are we getting into conspiracy theory and that sort of stuff with it?
There was some conspiracy theory stuff. I don't think I'm spoiling anything by saying this, that part of the first arc is set against the backdrop that, and I always love sharing the story. It's set against the backdrop of the fact that there is a head of an old Welsh king buried under the Tower of London. And the
Right.
idea is that the head is positioned in a way that it faces France. And
Yep.
the idea was that as long as that head was positioned that way under that tower, England would never be invaded. And funnily, true to this day, England has never faced a land invasion. Even at the height of World War II, there were bombings, but no enemy combatant ever set foot on English soil, right? And so I find that kind of stuff interesting. And so that forms the backdrop to then go away and go like, yeah, but what does that mean in a modern day context when, intelligence and warfare, has long dropped the idea of land invasion being needed. And yet, as we are learning in multiple fronts in the world today, you cannot get things done without committing people and real lives to the idea that you want to wage war. This whole idea of like, I'm sat far away, I push a button and the other country has to secede to my demands. Well, it doesn't work because the other country decides, well, I'm going to block this little passage in the sea that people use to transport oil. And suddenly the entire world is like, release your hands from my throat. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So there's that, internal friction between the modern state of warfare and the inability to move away from facts on the ground, which are true this day as they were 200, 300 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah, I love using, Bran the Blessed for this, with the, I guess, Welsh, that's for crow, if I'm
Yeah,
understanding
yeah, yeah. And
correctly,
so
and
it's called the
that's
Raven Conspiracy. And yeah,
yeah, yeah, and
and
that whole
also
thing
explains
with the
why
ravens.
Game of Thrones, it's Bran Stark that becomes the three-eyed raven. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, the ringmaster of the Black Tower is one Alistair Romeo, I guess.
Yep.
So
Yep.
his relationship with Darren, is that going to be similar to like an M Bond thing, or we like Galahad Eggsy? Because there's lots of mentor pupil kind of relationships and how that could play out in an espionage
So
story.
the funny part in this, and I appreciate the M Bond thing is still is James Bond and quintessentially British, but I
Yeah.
also love the fact that British statements of power tend to be very understated and they tend to be very passive aggressive. So staying true to that, no one is quite sure why Alistair Romeo is the boss of Black Tower, and that
Okay.
will that will be the case almost until you get to the very end. Throughout, he's just kind of bumbling through the story for about 3 or 4 issues. Things seem to be going out of control, and then you realize why he is where he is. Uh, uh, you know, when certain things happen, close to the climax. So, um, I also love. I was talking about this with Evan yesterday. He shares my love of characters who appear to be sort of incapable or inept
Okay.
right up until the moment where they are extremely not inept or not incapable. And so, yeah.
Mr. Bean kind of thing, or
Well, I guess the best example really is to pick from The Wire,
okay.
where, where one of I forget his name, the character who keeps building the miniature furnitures. Um, do you remember him?
I
So,
I remember him, but I'm not recalling the name either. It's been a
yeah,
while.
I'll eventually look up the name of the actor, but um, famously, he sat there through like half of a season, just in the corner, kind of building his miniature furniture. And other characters are discussing about like, oh, that actually brings him money more than being a cop does. So obviously, he's spending all his time on that. And then they get to an impasse where their group is being broken down. They haven't made any progress. And one of the characters really breaks down and says, I just really want to solve this. I want to do good police work. And it's at that point that he gets up and he goes like, if you want to do some real police work, then maybe I'm interested in working with you. And it's actually his suggestion that leads them to putting on the wiretaps, and therefore the show is called The Wire. So it's this character who's just sat in the corner in the background doing nothing until you
Gotcha.
realize I think in the story his name is Lester, but I could be wrong.
Well, I've seen the preview pages and it's absolutely beautiful. But what's your thing with hands and eyes, man? Because like it's super creepy and it's just repetitive. You keep doing this.
Yeah, I mean, but also like just in terms of classical magic, these are both symbols of potency and power, no? Both hands and
Yeah.
eyes. Hands because we do things with them, and eyes because they're the window to the world. And
Yeah.
so, just in terms of magic and symbolism, I think that completely makes sense.
It
Um,
does.
and also, like, I don't know if you've noticed, but Mike draws people's hands in really poetic and dramatic ways.
Yes.
And so I love getting Mike to draw some more hands. So that my script is full of hands and eyes
Ah,
wherever I can. Also, like,
they're s-
I have
so
to say to
fragile.
people I have to say to people who haven't seen this, it's not his eye in his hand. It's somebody else's eyes in his hand. That
And
makes
that
it
makes it
much better.
better? Oh, okay. 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 Well, I think I speak for a lot of us when I say I'm delighted to have you back here and cranking out work again because both these look fantastic. Very much looking forward
Yeah,
to them
thank you.
myself. Yeah. And Deicidium hits shelves in late September in the Black Tower at the end of the month. I
And
can't.
this is probably a good place to correct it.
Okay.
We're gonna have some scheduling issues with Deicidium just because we talked about a global release and it looks like Decidium will come out in France first at the end of October, obviously with it being a French publication, and therefore it means we've had to push back the American release because it's a little bit weird. We had stated that they should come out at the same time, but
Okay.
apparently the way things work in American publishing is the direct market gets the book a month in advance of the book market. Um, and so with that being the case, the direct market would have gotten it in September, which would have been before the main publisher released the books, and so obviously we couldn't do that. So now it'll come out in October in France. Shortly after, it'll come out in the direct market in the US, and then a
Okay.
month after that, it comes out in the book market in the US.
Okay. Publishing is complicated. Check.
As we find out, and we knew this was going to be the challenge with doing like a global release. So it's also going to be available in Spain. It's also going to be available in Italy, um, Poland, perhaps Portugal, and perhaps Brazil. So
So
very, very
currently
excited.
then,
Yeah.
how many languages is it going to be translated into for like a, initial release?
I mean, nailed down probably four
Okay.
and uh, um, potentially up to seven or eight.
Wow. Very cool.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I meant it. Like, I wanted to do something that felt different, even in terms of release cadence and format. So, this is absolutely. It would be a joy to have like a person from Brazil talking to a person from Italy about which god is from where. Yeah.
Way cool. Well, I know you can't offer specifics yet, but as a fan of painted horror comics, you recently teased what you're cooking up with artist Stephen Beach. And I know this is going to be lit. Like I'm John Bolton, John J. Muth,
Yeah, yeah.
huge fan of, like painted comics. So, it's just something very special about it. So I'm looking forward to that for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I've been working on that on the side with Steve, and it's part of publishing endeavor called Ninth Circle that we announced a little while back. But we've been quietly making this as part of it.
Yeah.
I'm supposed to be doing 3 horror one shots as part of that, and this one with Steve is going to be the first. And it's very much my kind of horror. So I'm not one for the sort of schlocky jump scare horror stuff. I'm more of the weird Thomas Ligotti. I just read this. I have no idea why it's horror, but it's definitely horror. Um, yeah. So I'm kind of excited to get back to that space. I feel like it's a space that I particularly enjoy being in, especially given the work I did with things like Blue and Green. Even parts of One Hand Six Fingers kind of fall squarely into that zone. So
Yeah.
now imagine being able to do 3 one-shots that are unashamedly entirely in that space of like, what the hell is this? It's messed up, but I have no idea what's going on.
Ah, my favorite. Well, Before I let you go, it's time for my shout out. And this could be something that inspired you recently or someone you'd like to thank that just did something nice for you. So I'll go first to give you a minute to think about it. Netflix has a new show that we've been watching as a family called Unique Spaces that showcases like a vast array of really, truly stunning architecture. And there was a recent one about the circular home that Frank Lloyd Wright built for his son. And it's undergoing a renovation that's being done by a Chinese father and daughter combo, and absolutely loved it. It's really, really fascinating show. So if you're a fan of high-end design, add it to your watch list. So what you got?
Cool. I'm gonna recommend an Indian horror film. The thing that's been really inspiring me. I went back to India for a vacation a week ago, and the thing that really inspired me is a lot of young people in India are creating art and stories and narrative that is really cool and interesting. Um, and so as a part of this, I'm gonna recommend a black and white Indian horror film that is not from Bollywood. It is a Malayali film, and it's called Brahmayugam. Um, and that's all I'll say about it. Go have a look, and if you enjoy it, then there's a lot more Indian horror that I can recommend. So yeah,
Nice. I'll have to put a link in the show notes. Check that out myself. I'm
great.
trying to put together my horror watch list for spooky season, as it'll be here sooner than we can
Yeah, there's
snap
some
our
really
fingers.
fascinating stuff going on with like younger filmmakers in India and their inclinations towards horror, but set in an Indian context and Indian setting. So, um, yeah, I mean, I want to say I did it first with D7 Chores on some level, but it is really nice to see people taking on subjects that aren't considered the sort of bread and butter of mainstream Bollywood.
Is there more of a fascination with horror in India going on right now in like a specific subgenre? You know, like body horror is huge right now in comics, for instance.
Sure.
So
Well, I think Indian horror necessarily is, on some level, contending with historic erasure, right? Because you
yeah.
had all of these really old, ancient belief systems and civilizations and kingdoms, and therefore really ancient superstitions and horror stories that kind of suddenly went away at first with being colonized, but also then with the wave of modernization that followed becoming a independent republic.
Mhm.
Uh, and I feel now that people have acquired the techniques and the tech of modernization, they're kind of looking back and discovering actually there's some really interesting stories that we have forgotten in our own past that I am now capable of telling to a modern audience in an interesting way because all this modern narrative technology is available to me. So there's some really slick looking films being made that are essentially about like an old landowner in some village outside of some town you haven't even heard of in pre-colonial India. There we go. There's your story, you know? Yeah.
Okay. Cool. All right. Well, Ram, it's always a pleasure getting a chance to catch up with you, hear about the new projects. Thanks for coming on and chatting with me today.
My
Appreciate it.
pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Well, this is Byron O'Neill on behalf of all of us at Comic Book Getty. Thanks for tuning in, and we will see you next time. Take care, everybody.
Ciao, ciao.
Peace.